I'm going to give you a history lesson. It's been 50 years since the carbon plague hit. What's the carbon plague, you ask? It was a disease that only killed adults. It's a terrible thing, and it left a generation of orphans behind. But at least the kids that contract it, if they survive into adulthood, they make it with no lasting effects. At least that's what the docs say anyway, but I'm not so sure. See, back in the 2020s, just before the Fourth Corporate War broke out, this unidentified AV went down near Haywood. Whatever it was carrying, it was bad stuff. In less than a month, 600 adults had died of a previously unknown disease that just melted them, literally. The whole thing got contained, cleaned up, covered up. The CDC, back when that was a thing, said that it was some sort of flu. Yeah, like a flu that melts your body. But on the street, they knew the truth. It was a bioweapon. And on the street, they started calling it the carbon plague. Now, the story goes that the orphan kids mostly wind up going to surviving relatives, or the special orphanage the Knight Foundation set up after the tragedy. And the story should end there, but it doesn't. Some of those kids weren't the same afterwards. They could do things. Things that shouldn't be possible. Mind reading. Hacking without a deck. Telekinesis. Literally comic book stuff. Story gets murky at this point, but sometime during the war, those kids all vanished. Officially counted among the missing after the downtown bombing. Some say they ran off. Another story I've heard is that some corp got wind of their abilities and kidnapped them, using the chaos of the war as cover. Now, personally, I'd like to think they busted out, made their escape, and they live free to this day. So maybe some of them are listening now. If you want to tell me your story, give me a call. I'll make sure it can't be traced. And I'll make sure the truth gets known. So hey people, Max Mike here. Now, I know you follow the news and the screen sheets, so by now I know you've heard about the assassination of those ESA officials during their big conference in Zurich, right? Yeah, the news says it's high rider extremist, lunar separatists pushing back on ESA expansion on the moon. But of course, that's not really what's going on here. Never is. Now, I've got friends in, let's say, high places, and they told me the truth of the matter. See, a few weeks ago, a Militech espionage team infiltrated an Arasaka base in the Mare Nubium. That's the Sea of Clouds. They were there because of unusual seismic activity at the base. It's an indicator that Arasaka's moving around a lot of regolith construction. For you dirt boys and dirt girls in the audience, let me clarify. Regolith's just a fancy name for moon rocks. So what do they find, you ask? Only a partially completed and totally unauthorized mass driver. That's a big rock thrower. It's really good for getting cargo materials back down to Earth from the moon. And also, as we learned in the last war, it's a great way to drop rocks on cities. So you might not know this, but new mass drivers are strictly regulated by international treaty, and they're prohibited under ESA lunar use contracts. The ESA has the ultimate high ground advantage in any Earth conflict, with their own Tycho and Copernicus mass drivers. And they really don't want anyone else having that same advantage. Especially Arasaka. So, my friends in the know tell me that Militech seems to have fed that information about Arasaka's secret mass driver to the ESA committee in advance of Arasaka's upcoming lunar contract renegotiations. And to keep their contracts, Arasaka has taken the drastic action to eliminate anyone in the ESA who might have seen this data on their mass driver. But hey, this was sloppy by Arasaka standards. In fact, so sloppy, I'd be really surprised if this had come from the top. I'm guessing some middle manager somewhere was just trying to cover their ass. All right, listen up, people. I've got a public service announcement. It's about the scourge of our age, that chrome nightmare that you know as cyberpsychosis. It seems we can't go a day without some boosted lunatic tearing through a crowd of bystanders. story you've always heard is that it's a psychological condition, a kind of disassociative violence. But is there more to it? What if cyberpsychosis is intentional? I once heard a theory that I think merits some thought. An old friend of mine used to say that he thought the biggest manufacturers had got together a long time ago and agreed on a baseline failure rate for certain devices. Bad code intentionally inserted into the mind-machine interfaces to slowly drive people up the wall, a kind of human planned obsolescence. I figure, what's the best defense against a nut job with a 23-inch telescoping blade in his forearm? A 26-inch telescoping blade in yours. Can't say he's not onto something. Every time some psycho tears his way through a mall, sales of combat cyberware spike. Every time Net54 News runs a story on a massacre, some Arasaka exec buys himself a new yacht. Can that be all, though? It's no secret that incidents of violent cyberpsychosis have skyrocketed in recent decades, despite improvements in manufacturing and design. But there is something new in the latest generation cyberware. Get ready for this, kids. It's the black wall. If you aren't a runner yourself, or a code jockey, you might not know, but the black wall isn't some mystical barrier floating somewhere in the deep net. It's actually a complex hardware-software infrastructure designed to keep AIs from accessing your gear, among other things. Maybe it doesn't work as well as NetWatch says. Maybe the madness of the deep net leaks over to our side from Blackwall from time to time. Drives some poor chumbo right over the edge. And it's possible it doesn't really exist anyway. Maybe it's just something the media came up with. Look, I'm not saying there aren't attacks. I've seen a few myself. What I am saying is there's a million reasons why one human might want to butcher another. Hell, we've been doing it for millions of years, even without cyberware. And let me tell you, listeners, with cyberware, it's easier than ever. And on the other side, maybe the corporate and media types just came up with a word, so they wouldn't have to think too hard about it. And you wouldn't either. Of course, this is all speculation. If I knew what caused cyberpsychosis, believe me, I'd tell you. I think Richard Knight made way too many enemies. This is a man who went on his own path. He wanted to build this place into a super city, a city of the future. You don't do that sort of thing in a world as corrupt as it was back then. And I'm pretty sure that between the mob, the governments, the corporations, he had enough enemies. Probably he didn't just get shot. There was probably a line outside his apartment. And the reason no one's ever figured out who did it? Well, that's because there were too many people who would have done it. He's a good man, but I think he picked the wrong enemies. I'll tell you, I have lived in a mega building. In fact, I lived in one of the first ones ever built in Watson. I didn't have much option. It was either that or go outside and find a squad underneath a radioactive bridge somewhere. So, it's crowded. You get to know your neighbors real well. Some of them you don't want to to know real well. But problem is, when you've got several 100,000 people, you got to put them somewhere. And Night City was not a good place to put people 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. There was a big hole in the ground, a lot of glowy stuff, and most of the inner city was wiped. So, what do I think? I think they're a necessary evil. They cleaned it up a bit. I mean, the first ones in Watson were a bit sketch. But we need them. They're not the best deal, but they might be the only deal we've got in town. Autonomous taxis, huh? I'm surprised they haven't done it more often. I mean, after all, they're not too smart. They're not like AIs or anything. I'm not even sure even AIs could do that. No, most probably someone hasn't been keeping up on all the real complex maintenance you need to do to keep one of these autonomous taxis on the road. And when you start cutting corners, that really simple, stupid robot stuff starts getting real simple and real stupid. So crashing into people, crashing into walls, buildings, could be anything, but I'd put it down to faulty maintenance instead of something real sinister. course, I could be wrong. If any listeners have anything you want to send in on me, call my producer. I'll look into it. You got food today. If you manage to get clothing, you probably have a nomad family out there to thank. They're the ones bringing in a lot of the food. They're bringing in a lot of the commerce. They've been out rescuing the abandoned ships and loads from back in the days of the Fourth Corporate War. So you may owe a nomad a lot more than you think. But I gotta say, among every group, there's some bad actors. Like the Raff and Shiv, for example, the Wraith guys. They are bad actors. But my friends in the nomad groups, they know they're bad actors. And they're trying to help Johnny Law hunt them down, get rid of them. So before you go paint all the nomads with the same brush, why don't you get a little learning first? Find out what you're talking about. Because whether you know it or not, you owe a nomad for your life. Well, I suppose I could give you the usual claptrap the politicians do about thank you for your service, but they don't care, and they didn't care when I mustered out either. What are you gonna do? Well, unfortunately, the nature of human beings the way they are, there's gonna be wars. And even if they're not declared wars, there's always gonna be a need for somebody who knows how to get around, use weapons, protect stuff, manage to get a hand onto, let's say, military